Okay, I'm just looking at the time. I can see Katarina is with us and Ilundi as well. Fantastic. And welcome. And Adrian as well. Great. Okay, shall we start? So a very warm welcome to all. I think that we are mostly among friends. My name is Adriana Alland, and I have the pleasure of leading the project, the Action Research Project that is convening this session, this discussion, and is called OVERDUE, Tackling the Sanitation Taboo Across Urban Africa. What you can see there are some details about the project, where to find more information. But before we get there, again, just for anyone that joined us late or just after we started, a few words in terms of housekeeping. First thing is just to highlight that we have interpretation, French, English interpretation. Many thanks to David for that. So that means that you need to go, before we start, you need to go to the little globe at the bottom of your screen that says interpretation and select the language in which you want to participate. Other than that, the usual protocol applies. So please keep your mics muted when you don't speak, but if possible, keep also your cameras on so that we can see you. There will be room and time for everyone to intervene, and we hope to have a very informal and fluid discussion, so you can unmute yourself when those points come. So without further ado, let me just say a few more words about why they focus on taboos. Perhaps, Pascal, you can take us back to the slide, to the main slide. So this session is focuses on the making and unmaking of sanitation taboos across urban Africa, and we want to expand that conversation even beyond urban Africa if you are coming or working in other contexts. We think that approaching the question of sanitation justice from the perspective of the taboos is very important exercise, and it's not just an academic or ethnographic exercise, but it's a very important means to understand the social norms, the universe of social norms that regulate the use of toilets, our bodies, and how sanitation work is understood and practiced. And we argue in OVERDUE that taboos often reinforce gender hierarchies, quietly undermining any possibility for equitable sanitation. So this is, if you wish, a key contention at the heart of our session today. If we go to the next slide, we would like to start with, we have set up a Mentimeter. You can answer at any point. You can start now and answer at any point of the session while we listen to the main contributors. So the two questions that we invite us all to reflect on are: what taboos regulate urban sanitation practices, experiences, and aspirations? And secondly, what impacts do these taboos have on women and girls? And when we talk about impacts, although we tend to think about the negative impacts of taboos, we also want you to highlight, if you see at all, any positive impacts, for instance, in the form of protection. So you have the details there. So to do that, you have to go to menti.com and use the code 788757 to share your views. We are going to copy all those details in the chat as well for you to see. So I hope you all got those details. And again, we're going to copy the details of the Menti on the chat, and you will be able to see the questions as soon as you enter it. We're going to come back to that, to the questions and to the Mentimeter and to the, the map, the cloud of words that come out of all our contributions later on. But before we do that, we are going to ask the four teams that put forward different contributions, mostly in the form of videos, but also of a paper, to help us reflect on these two questions from the main arguments that they want to put on the table today for discussion. So I'm going to give the floor for 5 minutes to each of the teams. I hope you have all seen the videos, which are on the paper again for one of the contributions. All of them are available on the conference website, so you can access them. If you haven't, you can access them at any time after the session. So let me start first with Angèle. So I want to invite now Angèle. Angèle Coué is the president of Shepalev, an organization that works in defense of women's rights and voices in Abidjan, in Ivory Coast. Angèle, the floor is yours. I ask you to highlight your key responses to these two questions in no more than 5 minutes. Thank you.
Ok, rebonjour tout le monde. Et c'est encore un plaisir pour moi de pouvoir aujourd'hui parler encore de tabous dans le milieu de l'assainissement. Principalement parler de l'expérience de la Côte d'Ivoire. Alors, en ce qui concerne les tabous, ils sont de plusieurs ordres et ils sont à tous les niveaux. D'abord, au niveau même de l'accès aux toilettes. Il est considéré en Afrique que les hommes doivent passer avant les femmes. Ça veut dire que le matin, quand une femme se réveille, qu'elle a envie de se soulager, faire pipi ou faire autre chose, comme aller à la selle et autres, elle ne peut pas, tant que les hommes n'ont pas fini de prendre leur douche ou d'aller à la selle ou de faire pipi, etc. Parce que dans la culture africaine, les hommes sont tellement des chefs que ça donne l'impression que les femmes sont un peu comme des esclaves. Ensuite, la raison pour laquelle on demande, par exemple, que les femmes passent après les hommes, en général, les gens trouvent que les femmes ne travaillent pas, donc il faut qu'elles attendent que les personnes qui travaillent, c'est-à-dire qui ont un boulot, puissent finir d'utiliser les toilettes avant de laisser la place aux femmes. L'autre raison aussi est que les gens trouvent qu'on ne sait pas quand est-ce que la femme fait ses menstruations. Alors, on décide que les femmes sont généralement sales et qu'il faut attendre que les toilettes soient utilisées par les hommes avant que les femmes ne viennent salir les toilettes avec leurs règles. Autre tabou encore, il est dit que quand une femme est dans les toilettes, elle ne doit pas, par exemple, communiquer avec les personnes de l'extérieur. Ce qui est supposé à travers ce tabou encore, c'est que quand une femme est nue dans les toilettes et qu'elle parle avec une personne de sexe masculin dehors, c'est comme si elle avait commis l'adultère parce qu'elle est nue et elle a parlé avec un homme dehors. Cela signifie qu'elle a, entre guillemets, eu des rapports sexuels de façon virtuelle, bon, allez-y comprendre, avec cet homme. Un autre tabou aussi, c'est que les hommes ont le droit, par exemple, d'émettre des gaz avec du bruit, etc., de faire pipi debout et émettre des sons. Mais en ce qui concerne la femme, quand une femme est dans les toilettes, on ne doit rien entendre, on ne doit rien sentir. Une dernière chose aussi, c'est que, enfin, il y a plusieurs tabous, hein, mais je vais donner quelques tabous. Il y a aussi le fait que quand une femme est en grossesse, il est interdit à cette dernière de se laver au-delà de 18h30. C'est-à-dire que dès qu'il y a le coucher du soleil, la femme ne peut plus se laver quand elle est enceinte. Alors, la conséquence qu'on lui donne, c'est que son bébé peut être échangé, son bébé peut être mort-né, etc. Du coup, les femmes vivent avec une psychose de ne pas perdre leur bébé. Et donc, à partir de 18 heures, quand elles sont, par exemple, en ville et qu'elles doivent rentrer un peu plus tard, elles ne peuvent plus se laver alors qu'il fait chaud chez nous. Et donc, elles dorment vraiment dans des conditions de mal-être total. Il y a plusieurs autres tabous et aussi au niveau de la question de comment je peux appeler ça, des tâches, c'est-à-dire des rôles que les hommes et les femmes jouent en ce qui concerne l'assainissement. Ce que nous avons remarqué, c'est que tous les rôles d'entretien des toilettes, de gestion des toilettes au niveau de la maison, au niveau de la cour, ce sont les femmes qui doivent être à la tâche. En fait, c'est parce que ce n'est pas rémunéré tant que ça se fait à la maison. Mais quand on sort de la maison et que ce sont des toilettes publiques, ce sont des toilettes des entreprises, etc., ce sont les hommes qui sont dans le métier de l'assainissement parce que là, c'est rémunéré. Et ce qu'on trouve à dire, c'est que les femmes sont en talons, les femmes sont trop propres dehors pour travailler dans l'assainissement parce qu'on suppose que l'assainissement, ça salit. Par contre, à la maison, ce sont les mêmes tâches, mais comme ce n'est pas rémunéré, les femmes le font. Donc, vraiment, c'est tout ce paradoxe-là que nous vivons en Afrique. Autre chose, c'est que les conséquences sont énormes parce que les femmes retiennent, par exemple, leur pipi, leur sel à la maison jusqu'à ce que les hommes finissent de faire leurs besoins et tout. Et pendant notre enquête, beaucoup de femmes ont témoigné être malades, avoir des maladies liées à la rétention d'urine et autres, à partir de cette situation où les hommes sont toujours prioritaires. Il y a aussi le fait que dans l'entretien des toilettes, les femmes n'ont pas toujours le matériel nécessaire à la maison pour pouvoir se protéger contre les maladies liées à la salubrité. Et donc, il y a beaucoup de maladies que les femmes développent, que les filles développent, etc. Donc, voici un peu ce que je peux dire en ce qui concerne la Côte d'Ivoire sur les tabous. Plusieurs tabous, les femmes ont le droit, les hommes ont le droit de tout et les femmes sont interdits de tout. Quand on doit être dans un public, par exemple, les femmes n'ont pas le droit de passer devant le public pour aller se soulager, mais les hommes, ils ont le droit d'aller plusieurs fois et de revenir. Voilà un peu ce que je voudrais dire. Je vous remercie.
Thank you so much, Angel, for really giving us a very comprehensive picture of the spectrum of ways in which taboos regulate women's, not only women's bodies, but also their needs, their roles and their rights. So we have seen here a range of forms of control, particularly exerted over women and girls, that range from issues to do with access to toilet, health impacts, obviously issues of stigmatization, for instance, during menstruation periods and so on. And the very important point that I'm sure we will want to go back to, which has to do also with the boundaries between what is seen as treated as acceptable, but also what is seen as treated as work and recognized and remunerated or not as such. I'm going to now invite a second contribution, the team from a second contribution. This is a contribution by Catarina Simoes Mavila from Austral, Elder Domingo from FACE, and Ilundi Polonia Cabral, also from Austral. And they are all members of the OVERDUE team working in the city of Beira in Mozambique, although some of them are based in Maputo. The video that they put forward, and I hope many of you had the chance to see, explore in particular the issue of menstrual taboos and what menstrual taboos are still alive in the context, in this case of Beira, and how do people on the ground, how do women and men see those taboos changing over time as with a presumption or the assumption perhaps that we are in cities, people are leaving behind many of those taboos, and they are being replaced by what are described as more modern practices or beliefs, putting that notion in question. So Katarina and Elder, I'm going to now give you the floor. 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana. Of the first menstruation in the Beira state, the first menstruation of girl in the Beira city is surrounded by the various taboos. Women in the urban context seek to distance themselves from taboos and they describe them as ancient ones that happened in the rural context. We find that these taboos are not limited to the rural context. They prevail in the urban context and the present. However, the existing taboos are not discussed in the public sphere. They are confined to the domestic sphere to protect the menstruated woman. Public knowledge that woman is menstruated may result in witchcraft. For example, women suffering from non-stop bleeding. In order to protect the woman from this, at her first menstruation, the girl has to go through a traditional ceremony that is accompanied by several restrictions. For example, the girl may not use the same bathroom as the other member of the family. A temporary bathroom should be built for her. And the clothes used, the dressing or homemade sanitary pads are washed and made dry indoors so that people outside the family do not know that the girl is menstruated and for nothing had to happen to her. The girl should not cook or season the food. She must prepare her own meal. And the girl can't walk down the street. She should stay at home until the end of the menstruation. The parents of the girl cannot have sex during the girl's first menstruation cycle. And looking for the impact to these taboos for women or girl, negative things, it's family who are not perform traditional ceremony have implication for the girl life. The girl may not be able to become pregnant in the future and may accuse the parents of sorcerers. And the girl who do not inform mother about their first menstruation and they do not go through the ceremony may have health problems, catch various diseases, and they die. And additional cost, and this girl have additional cost of water for bathing and washing the clothes. And the positive things, who the girl's family who fulfill the ceremony, the girl have no bleeding, no pain problem during the menstruation cycle, and no difficult getting pregnant. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katharina. And again, a very important set of additional layers and arguments to our discussion, particularly showing, on the one hand, that we see people distancing themselves from taboos as something that only belongs to rural areas, but also their prevalence, but in a different form, in a perpetuation of silences, where again, the relegation of issues to do with bodily fluids and bodily functions, such as menstruation, are confined and restricted to the domestic sphere, preventing public discussions, making invisible the bodies and the experience of women and girls when, in this case, menstruating. Following on this topic, I'm now going to invite Sneha Krishnan, who is also going to be talking about gender taboos around menstruation hygiene in the context of South Sudan. And what her contribution adds is a very important context where we see also what happens when taboos are enforced in a context of multiple crises and deprivations. And we are talking here about a context ridden by conflict and displacement, by food insecurity, by floods, and the list goes on. Sneha, I'm going to give you the floor. Grateful if you can also introduce any other members of your team if they're here with us. And please remember to speak as slowly as possible so that David can follow through the interpretation. Sneha, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Adriana. Thank you so much for even setting the context of the presentation before our two speakers as well. This work was undertaken in collaboration with Christian Aid partners at EDGE, as well as ADA. ADA is an organization based in Juba, South Sudan. And the work happened during COVID-19. So I have to say at the outset that I'm just representing voices of all our collaborators, of all the women who participated in this research in 2 of these provinces. So please bear with me as I try to do justice to this work. Like Adriana rightly pointed out, the work was undertaken to understand how COVID was impacting these communities. This was a project funded by DEC for COVID, for responding to COVID. And as the Christian Aid team understood the field realities, they realized that COVID is not even a concern in these remote provinces. Maybe some people in Juba were getting affected, but in these remote provinces where access even for humanitarian workers is such a huge challenge, COVID was not even on the list. So then what was it? The biggest challenge that these provinces were facing was waterlogging from floods, which had happened in two consecutive years, and the waters had not yet receded. Within this context, if you try and understand how women carry out their day-to-day activities, both in the sphere of the household and also within their own body, it becomes quite an amazing task to do this virtually, to do this research virtually as well. So I have to highlight that I don't think this even captures 5% of the entire picture. What we did find was women were largely responsible for all of the livelihood as well as household related tasks. By livelihood, I mean, although everything was destroyed, they were still going out to fish. They were still responsible to ensure that the kids and the elderly and other members of the household are being fed. And remember, all the floodplains have been waterlogged. So there is no farming happening as well. So within this context, you find women are actually relying on whatever is available, whichever is growing, whichever plant is growing in these waters, they are actually threshing them and using that powder, lilies, say water lilies, for example, and using that to feed their children. Within this context, when probed further for what do they do for menstrual hygiene, they just said, we let it flow. By that, I mean, what I interpret is it is not even considered to be a priority for them. They continue to believe that when so much is becoming a challenge to even procure food, to ensure that the children are being fed, because if the child goes hungry, if even if a meal is not being provided, then she is at risk of being abused by the householder, the main householder, because he considers it to be her responsibility to be feeding their children. So within that context, when we asked or when we surveyed these households to find out what materials they are using, most of them said that they don't use any materials. Some of them do use old rags or cloths, but it becomes challenging to dry them and wash them in these circumstances. So I think to answer the two questions that is being posed to the panel, and all the attendees about what are the taboos considering sanitation, I think it becomes important to even talk about menstrual hygiene, because this is something that always gets pushed under the carpet in any humanitarian context, be it in the Asian countries or be it in African context as well, as the speakers before me also pointed out. So within a humanitarian context, I think, and we have research to show that not only women, but adolescent girls also are hugely affected because of both the humanitarian crisis as well as not being able to meet their menstrual hygiene needs and the shame associated with it. A lot of other studies in South Sudan, existing literature points out to high, almost 95% dropout rate from schools, because when girl children are not encouraged to go to school when they are menstruating. So this remains a huge concern within humanitarian system, where both the education cluster, the protection cluster, as well as health cluster need to come together to work and address this, because not just menstrual health, but also the wider field of sexual reproductive health somehow gets silenced. And this emerged through a focus group discussion that we did with some of the participants, stakeholders in South Sudan, where they said that this can be directly linked to gender-based violence as well. Because if women start protesting, if women are considered to be voicing their opinions and the man just chooses another wife, she cannot even decide when to get pregnant. There are many other issues which start with the basic right to be able to access menstrual hygiene products, and then becoming more aware of their own body, about the rights that they have in terms of pregnancy, in terms of other sexual reproductive health needs. With that, I would like to pause here, and I'm open to any questions and any further discussions. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Sneha, again for this picture. Before I just highlight a couple of key things I take from your intervention, I just want to mention that I think that we are very much in a cozy group, which is great, but still we would love to, for everyone in the room, even if we are colleagues who know each other very well, to give it a go and answer the two questions we proposed through the Menti. I believe that so far only one person has done it, so just take your time. We're going to repeat on the chat the instructions of how you can reach the Menti meter, just to kick off and amplify the discussion on the points on which we are going to focus. So Sneha, listening to your presentation, again, many important points, many that resonate with the previous presentations, but I would like to table at least two additional points that you brought for discussion. One, I think, has to do with what you're showing us is the extent to which there is a very important process of internalization of the taboos by women and girls themselves. so in a way they become also, you know, very much perpetuate, yeah, the reproduction of the social control that is exerted over their bodies. And to understand that is very important. A second issue, which is also, I think, very interesting that you put on the table, is the role and the way in which the development world, and particularly, let's say, the humanitarian, you know, army, you know, of organizations and institutions relate to issues of menstrual hygiene management, or don't actually. And so here we see again something that is not, when we talk again about menstruations and many taboos and so on, we don't see only a silence perpetuated and reproduced socially in a specific context, but we also see that done through the planned interventions. So there is a very important issue in terms of also responsibility, you know, in those lines that are supposedly designed to support people on the ground and to support women, not to render them and their bodies invisible. So two very useful points to add to the discussion. On that note, I want to now invite our last group of contributors. They are Sheila Salum, Tatu Limbumba, and Professor Wilbur Combe from RD University. They are also partners in the OVERDUE project, although they are based in Dar es Salaam, the work has been very much focusing on the city of Mwanza. What they put forward in their video was a very interesting examination of what is a relationship between the taboos that we might find, or the norms, control norms that we might find as social norms, and on the other hand, as official norms, very often in the form of bylaws, for instance. So, and what is a relationship between the two? Are they talking about the same thing? Are they looking and approaching sanitation and the experiences, practices, and aspirations of women and girls in the same way, in confronting, in challenging ways, in mutually reinforcing ways? So this is where their contribution comes. Again, I invite now Sheila and Tatu. I believe we are going to be speaking with Prof. Combe, adding something, 5 minutes, and please remember to speak slowly. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sheila Salum. I'm from that team in Mwanza, particularly. I'm here with the team, Dr. Tatu, Professor Combe, with the Dr. Tim from CCI. Much has been spoken. I think we have similarities across all African cities on the taboos that we regulated urban sanitation practices. For instance, I've seen the presentation from Mozambique, Ivory Coast, and South Sudan, talking about how menstruation issues are not allowed to be spoken in front of men, which cross-cut in all cities. Also, on the engagement on the household routine activities, like girls are not allowed to engage in household routine activities such as cooking for men and stuff. I think it's just similar to what we found in Mwanza as well. And also, like, however, much is not practiced as compared, it's not as much intense from other cities. Only the issues on the not engaging men on menstruation issues. These rules are there to regulate sanitation. They can be good, but they also have negative impact to girls and women. For instance, like women are not allowed to engage in household routine, such as gardening. I think this makes women being inferior even girls being inferior, like they cannot express themselves or they cannot engage in activities when they are in their menstruation periods. In my view, I see these social norms are strongly gender biased against women and girls, as they in pretense that they are good for all, but what you can see, they are just there to protect men. So that's what I can say about that. Maybe our colleague, Dr. Tatu, can take a lead on the consequences of these taboos, so of these social norms, the consequences. Thank you very much.
Okay, Sheila has outlined some of the rules, the formal ones and the informal ones. She has highlighted the informal rules, which are basically the taboos and the norms that look at sanitation. What we can say when it comes to the consequences, we see that these sanitation laws and taboos are meant to sort of sanction the behavior in terms of public health. But the problem is that they bring hardships, more hardships to women specifically, especially the social norms. When it comes to the formal rules, they are also meant to regulate public health. But then another issue is that they fall short of looking at women in particular because they are more general. So you see that sometimes in terms of public health rules and laws, women suffer most, especially in areas where you don't have access to water and sanitation. Some of the negative consequences also bring to light the precarious conditions, experiences of women, regardless of whether these rules are formal or informal. But what we can say and see, for instance, in Mwanza is that because of the historical patriarchal system, social norms still prevail. Despite having these formal rules, we still have these social norms prevailing. And for instance, stigma, which is in terms of menstruation health, which is brought about probably by lack of knowledge and lack of knowledge about menstruation, especially men, despite the fact that they say that this is to regulate public health, that girls and women cannot throw, for instance, sanitary towels in public, etc. But we see that they still undermine the position of women and girls. But then when it comes to public health, somehow they talk to each other. Like Adrian was saying, where do these rules talk to each other? It's a question of trying to look at the threats that are there when you have, for instance, open defecation, or when you have people throwing sanitary towels in public. And this is where they might talk to each other. But unfortunately, when you have patriarchal systems, you can see that women and girls suffer more. Okay. Maybe if Professor Kombe, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't have anything specific to add. I just want to ask questions, one or two questions. One is that, do taboos have anything dimension? Are there cases, are there tribes, are there ethnic groups where taboos are predominantly practiced and where they are painting? And the other question I want to ask is, how are taboos transferred from one generation to another? What are the mechanisms through which taboos are maintained, sustained, and ensure that they are transferred from one generation to another? And the final question I want to ask is, does enlightenment, education, awareness, do these taboos die out among the elites, especially those who are highly educated, who are educated, not highly educated, those are educated, secondary school, especially level, college level, and above? Do these taboos hold, or are they sustained, or are they transformed? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. I know that we are hitting the limit of the time for today's session, which means that we are going to end with more questions and answers, or with more questions and with the questions that we started, which I think is a very good sign, and also an invitation to continue this conversation. Just to highlight, I think that, I mean, we are again, I think that important points that emerge throughout the discussion for us to continue to take further this discussion, this way of looking at sanitation. On the one hand, concern clearly the way in which taboos perpetuate forms of silence, forms of invisibility, forms of oppression and suppression of particularly women's and girls' experiences. A second important point for us to perhaps, go back to is a question of what I would call the justification paradox, and to look at the reasons why taboos continue to be perpetuated and defended. Why are they enforced in the same place? And here again and again, I think that through the different interventions, what we hear is that they're very often, the justification very often is that the taboo needs to be in place for the protection of women and girls, although we can see through the impacts exactly the opposite. I think that, and again, just to conclude, a third very important aspect, which connects to some of the questions that Prof. Combe put on the table right now, has to do with the way in which taboos actually travel across different scales and different spheres of action much more fluidly than we presume. So we tend to think about taboos as something very much confined to particular groups with a common cultural practices and so on. And clearly what we saw today is that this is not the case. So this traveling of taboos from cultural practices to spheres of intervention, to spheres of governance, to spheres of planning is extremely important. And again, a dimension that needs to be explored. What we are going to do now, I know that we are 2 minutes over time, is we don't have time to share the Mentimeter outcomes. I'm going to invite us all again to do contribute our views on those 2 questions on the Mentimeter, even after we close the session. And then what we will do is we will share the outcomes through social media, through Twitter, as soon as they are available. I also invite you once more to visit our website, the OVERDUE website, to keep in touch. You have all the contact details there so that you can connect to the team. And a very big thanks to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Adriana. And thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.